Hey there! Today, I want you to step into a story that'll make you question everything you think you know about trust, love, and what can happen behind closed doors. Picture a seemingly perfect marriage in the heart of suburban America. Two young, bright individuals on the brink of a new life chapter. Then, imagine it all unraveling in the most shocking way possible. We're about to journey through the tragic case of Lori Kay Soares, a woman who believed wholeheartedly in her husband's sincerity, only to discover his intricate web of lies. And not just small lies, we're talking entire life fabrications. When those lies finally caught up to him, the result was, well, heartbreaking doesn't even begin to describe it. Today we'll explore exactly who Lori was, how she grew up, the life she built with Mark hacking, and the devastating truth behind her disappearance in the summer of 2004. As we go along, I'll ask for your thoughts. So get ready to comment with what you think happened at various points. Are you ready? Because this story, it's a roller coaster of betrayal. Let's begin. Lori Kay Soares, was born on December 31, 1976 in California. Little is known about her biological parents, but her adoption brought her into the loving home of Thelma and Gerald Soares. Gerald, originally from Brazil, met Thelma during a mission in Rio de Janeiro, and afterward, they settled in Fullerton, California. Their journey led them to adopt Lori, whose early childhood was spent in the warm embrace of that family. For the first several years of her life, Lori experienced what many would call a normal, happy upbringing. She was bright, curious, and known among friends for her warm, welcoming nature. But life doesn't always stay predictable. When Lori was 11, Thelma and Gerald divorced. That separation meant big changes. Lori moved with her mother to Orem, Utah. Can you imagine being uprooted at that age, suddenly shifting to a new environment, a new school, leaving old friends behind? It wasn't easy, but Lori had that determined spirit people admired. She adapted quickly, making new friends and finding her place in the Orem community. Now, I want you to picture Lori at age 14 or 15, navigating the usual teenage experiences, school dances, new friendships, those first real crushes. Life was moving forward. In the mid-1990s, she crossed paths with a young man named Mark Hacking. No one knew it then, but that single meeting would set the stage for a future tragedy. Lori was instantly drawn to Mark's charm. He was about the same age, born in 1976, just months before Lori, and had a seemingly outgoing personality. Their acquaintances in Orem recall that from the moment they met, they were inseparable. They did normal teenage couple things, hanging out at friends' houses, going to movies, cracking jokes in the hallways at school. Eventually, they started dating more seriously. By the time they were both in their early 20s, they'd become the kind of couple that seemed destined to make it all the way. Friends described them as incredibly close, finishing each other's sentences, showing up at gatherings hand in hand, always supporting each other's goals. On the surface, everything looked like a fairy tale romance. People often ask, were there any red flags early on? At the time, no one saw them. Mark appeared to be a bright, motivated guy with a big dream. He wanted to follow in the footsteps of his family members, many of whom worked in medicine. Meanwhile, Lori had a strong work ethic and was known for her down-to-earth personality. Can you imagine? Two young people on the cusp of building a life together. It all seemed, well, perfect. In 1999, that's 1999 spelled out for clarity, Lori and Mark tied the knot. The wedding was a joyful celebration with family and friends, though some recall Mark's side being quite large, given his extended relatives and connections in Utah. Lori, who was always searching for a sense of belonging, now had a husband who seemed equally devoted to her. In the years that followed, Mark told everyone he was enrolled at the University of Utah, working on a psychology degree. He boasted about top grades, shared stories of his accomplishments, and eventually claimed he'd graduated with honors. And it didn't end there. He talked about applying for medical school in North Carolina, telling family he'd been accepted and was preparing to start classes soon. Lori, meanwhile, had built a solid career. By 2004, she was working as an executive assistant and was well respected by her colleagues. She was described by 16 co-workers as driven, intelligent, and an all-around go-getter. And guess what? Around mid-2004, Mark announced to everyone that he and Lori were moving to North Carolina so he could begin medical studies. Lori was excited. She'd recently resigned from her job in anticipation of that move. Even more, she believed she might be 5 weeks pregnant, adding an extra layer of joy. Life was rolling along on a path that seemed unstoppable. Before we continue, I have a question for you. If you discovered that your partner might be lying about something as big as medical school, do you think you would sense it? Share your gut feeling in the comments. Because as we'll see, some lies are so skillfully crafted, you might never see the cracks until it's too late. It's early morning on July 19, 2004, a day that would change everything. According to Mark, Lori woke up at around 5:30 a.m. to go for her usual jog in a nearby park. Perfectly normal, right? She was always active, and it wasn't unusual for her to be up before sunrise. Fast forward a few hours. Mark calls Lori's workplace around 10 o'clock. He's concerned because she hasn't shown up, and Lori was notoriously punctual. Her boss says, "She's not here, haven't seen her all morning." Immediately Mark claims that Lori must have gone to the park, never returned, and maybe she went straight to work in her car. But no one had heard from her. By this point, Mark is on edge. He calls the police at about 10:07 a.m. to report his wife missing, then calls again about 40 minutes later saying he found Lori's car parked near the entrance of the jogging trail. But no sign of Lori. That's when alarm bells started ringing. Lori's boss advised Mark to notify authorities, but the police initially said that typically, one has to wait 24 hours before filing a missing persons report, unless there's evidence of foul play or extenuating circumstances. Meanwhile, Lori's family, friends, and colleagues decided they weren't going to wait. They rallied together to start a search, scouring the park, the neighborhood, anywhere they thought she might have gone. Her mother, Thelma, and her father, Gerald, were frantic. Relatives even flew in from across the country, determined to help find Lori. If you've ever frantically looked for someone you love, you know that feeling in your chest, the panic, the dread, the desperate hope that any second now they'll appear with a perfectly good explanation. But that day came and went, and nothing. By July 20th, the Salt Lake City police officially joined the search efforts. They organized press conferences encouraging anyone with information to step forward. Lori's picture, she had bright eyes, short dark hair, an infectious smile, was plastered across hundreds of flyers. Over 1,000 volunteers turned up to help. The media coverage was intense. Morning shows, nightly news, local radio, all spotlighting the pregnant 27-year-old who vanished on a routine run. All the while, Mark Hacking appeared in front of cameras with tears in his eyes. He told reporters how worried he was, how he just wanted his wife home safe and sound. Some people sympathized deeply with him. Imagine your pregnant wife disappearing. Others felt something was off. Then, on July 20th, police got a call about Mark's erratic behavior near a local hotel. According to witnesses, he was wearing nothing but sandals, acting agitated and clearly distressed. He ended up in a psychiatric ward at the University of Utah Hospital. Now, many of Lori's loved ones explained away Mark's breakdown, saying the stress of losing his wife had driven him temporarily over the edge. They had no reason to doubt that. But behind the scenes, law enforcement was already looking at Mark as a prime suspect. You might ask, why so soon? Because in cases like this, a spouse is often the first person investigators scrutinize. And as it turned out, the deeper the police dug, the more Mark's perfect facade began to crumble. On July 22nd, just 3 days after Lori disappeared, Mark's father, Dr. Douglas Hacking, made a startling admission to the media. He explained that contrary to what Mark had told everyone, his son had never graduated from the University of Utah. In fact, he dropped out in 2002. No bachelor's degree, no honors, no acceptance to medical school in North Carolina. The entire narrative was a sham. Can you imagine learning that the person you're closest to, someone you've built your life around, had constructed their identity on a foundation of lies? That's exactly what happened to Lori's family. They'd been led to believe Mark was on track to become a doctor, and that was the reason for their big move across the country. After all, Mark came from a medical family. His dad was a pediatrician, his mom was a nurse, and his siblings had their own scientific achievements. The pressure to succeed must have been immense, but still, does that justify lying? Some people felt that while Mark's dishonesty was terrible, it didn't automatically mean he'd harmed Lori. Others thought, if he can lie that elaborately, who's to say he's not lying about his wife's fate? The tension was palpable. Investigators continued searching for Lori, but their suspicion about Mark grew stronger every day. He insisted he was innocent, but the evidence was stacking up against him. When police examined the hacking apartment, they found an unsettling scene. The bedroom mattress was heavily damaged, springs exposed, as if part of it had been sliced away. A store receipt showed Mark had purchased a new mattress on the very morning Lori vanished, supposedly around the time he was searching for her at the park. They also discovered bizarre dark red stains on kitchen utensils, pieces of carpet stuffed into a bedside table drawer, and other suspicious items, clothes thrown haphazardly, plus a note that appeared to be from Lori, found in a guest room. And get this, Lori's car keys turned up inside the apartment, which made absolutely no sense if Lori had driven to the park. Even more odd, the driver's seat in her car was pushed way back, suitable for someone around 1.8 meters tall, roughly 5'11", but Lori was only about 1.5 meters tall, around 5 feet. Why would she adjust the seat that drastically, if at all? Outside the apartment, more clues emerged. A cut-up mattress was found in a dumpster near the University of Utah Hospital. A strand of dark hair surfaced in another dumpster near a gas station, and surveillance footage from various spots around Salt Lake City showed Mark's car traveling to places he claimed he'd never gone that morning. The puzzle pieces began to form a grim picture, that Lori had never gone for a jog at all. Instead, something horrific had happened inside that apartment sometime in the early hours of July 19. On July 25, 2004, less than a week after Lori vanished, Mark's own brothers, Scott and Lance, approached the police with a gut-wrenching confession. Mark had admitted to them that he was responsible for what happened to Lori. They'd confronted him while visiting him at the psychiatric clinic, pleading, "Just tell us what really happened." He eventually broke down and confessed. The exact details he shared were horrifying. Mark claimed that on July 19, he ended Lori's life at their apartment, then disposed of her body and other incriminating items in dumpsters around the city. Just let that sink in. Lori was only 27 years old, believed herself to be pregnant, and had a bright future ahead. All it took was one confrontation about his lies to push Mark into doing the unthinkable. Or at least, that's the scenario emerging from Mark's confession. Days before, on July 16, Lori had learned from the University of North Carolina that Mark wasn't enrolled there at all. Furious and confused, she confronted him. On Friday, July 16, she even called the university again to double-check. That same day, co-workers recalled her crying at the office. She left work early, presumably to confront Mark about this big deception. Yet, that evening, they both attended a party at her boss's country house, appearing normal, like everything was fine. Maybe Lori believed Mark's excuses of a computer error. Maybe she just wanted to salvage the situation. Then on Sunday, July 18, they had an intense discussion about it. Mark came clean. He'd been lying about his education for years. Heartbroken, Lori went to bed. Mark stayed up packing, presumably for their upcoming move, rummaging through closets where he came across a firearm. In the early hours of July 19, sometime around 1 a.m., Mark ended Lori's life, then set about disposing of the evidence. According to his own admission, he cut up parts of the mattress, wrapped them in garbage bags, and dumped them in various dumpsters around 2 in the morning. Hours later, he started faking a frantic search for his missing wife. Mark was arrested on August 2, 2004. Prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder and 3 counts of obstruction of justice, based largely on his confession and the mounting physical evidence. Initially, bail was set at $500,000 but was later raised to $1 million. Meanwhile, the search for Lori's remains intensified. One of the saddest parts of this story is the landfill search. Law enforcement, volunteers, and even specially trained dogs scoured through thousands of tons of garbage, some piles nearly 40 feet deep, hoping to find any remnants that could confirm Mark's confession. It was a heart-wrenching, grueling process, with many volunteers working 11 hours a day. They never gave up. Despite the conditions, rotting waste, the searing summer heat, the emotional weight of knowing they were searching for a beloved daughter, sister, friend. Finally, in October 2004, police found human remains in a dumpster that matched Lori's DNA. The area was cordoned off, forensic experts spending hours gathering every piece of evidence. Lori's parents were informed almost immediately, and it brought them a bittersweet form of closure. Heartbreak that their worst fears were confirmed, but relief in being able to finally lay Lori to rest. With Lori's remains discovered, Mark's fate in court looked grim. Despite the evidence and his earlier admission to his brothers, he stunned everyone by pleading not guilty at an arraignment in October 2004. Lori's mother, Thelma, felt an immense wave of frustration. How could he prolong the suffering, given what he'd already told his own family? Still, the trial date was set for late April 2005. As it approached, many speculated the prosecution would seek the harshest possible penalty. But there was debate over whether they had enough to secure a capital conviction. After all, while Mark had confessed informally, the circumstances of that confession and the exact details of premeditation were murky. Then, on April 15, 2005, Mark changed his plea to guilty. In a 10-minute statement before the court, he gave a chilling description of what happened on July 19. His words were brief, but direct. He accepted responsibility, though he couldn't, or wouldn't, explain why he did it. Some believe it was to spare his family the anguish of a lengthy trial. Others suspect he hoped it might lead to a more lenient sentence. Lori's mother was both relieved that he finally came clean and horrified by the details. After all, this was the man her daughter had loved and trusted. On June 6, 2005, Mark Hacking stood before the court one last time to be sentenced. The judge handed down a term of 6 years to life in prison for first-degree murder, meaning Mark would be eligible for parole around 2035. As he heard those words, Mark reportedly broke down in tears. Then he was led away to begin his sentence at the Utah State Prison. Outside the courtroom, Mark's parents faced reporters. They were devastated, labeling his actions unforgivable, while also pointing to his mental health issues. Dr. Douglas Hacking read a letter from Mark stating he felt safer in prison, that he was aiming to atone for his sins, and that he apologized to everyone he hurt. Some saw this as a manipulative ploy for sympathy. Others believed it was genuine remorse. Not long after, Lori's family decided to remove the name Hacking from her memorial plaque. That was their way of preserving Lori's memory apart from the man who destroyed her life. Yet in the years that followed, Thelma, Lori's mother, chose to exchange letters with Mark behind bars. She went on record saying she forgave him on a personal level, even though she would never forget or fully heal from losing her daughter. In 2006, another disturbing twist surfaced. Mark had allegedly been selling his autograph and other prison-related items through a website that catered to so-called true crime memorabilia. It wasn't illegal per se, but it was extremely distasteful, profiting from a brutal crime. After discussions with prison authorities, Mark agreed to cease those activities. The moral debate, though, lingered. How should the public treat criminals who gain notoriety? Should they be allowed to capitalize on their infamy? These controversies brought renewed attention to the case. Some people wondered whether Mark truly grasped the gravity of his actions, or if he was still manipulating the narrative. Even all these years later, Lori's friends describe her as a kind, gentle soul with a bright smile. She had dreams of being a mom, building a life full of adventure and family gatherings. Co-workers recall her dedication and optimism, someone who always put in the extra effort to support the team. Her adoptive father, Gerald, described her as the type of person who'd walk into a room and make everyone feel at ease. Those who loved her insist her spirit lives on in their memories even though she never got to realize her biggest dreams. Birthdays, holidays, and everyday moments often bring her loved ones to tears, reminding them of the hole she left behind. So here we are, reflecting on a case that started with a single, seemingly harmless lie and ended in the most unthinkable tragedy. Mark's deception about finishing college, about being accepted into medical school, some might have dismissed those as simple cover-ups for academic failure, but lying at that scale erodes trust, and once that trust is gone, the fallout can be devastating. Think about it. If Lori had discovered Mark's lies at a different point, maybe before getting married, would she have walked away? Or would Mark have found a way to keep her in the dark even longer? If you were in Lori's position, what would you have done upon discovering such an enormous lie? Feel free to share your thoughts. It's a tough question to wrestle with. Another crucial piece, the potential pressure Mark felt from his high-achieving family. Was that enough to tip him over the edge when Lori confronted him? Plenty of people face parental expectations without resorting to violence. But in Mark's case, maybe it contributed to a mental breakdown. Does that justify anything? Absolutely not. Yet it's part of understanding the human psyche, how someone can convince themselves they have no other options. This story is heartbreaking on so many levels. It's the story of a young woman who deserved a long, fulfilling life, but ended up a victim of someone she trusted most. It's the story of families broken apart by secret betrayals. It's also a reminder of how quickly a picture-perfect scenario can collapse once the cracks start to show. Perhaps the most haunting question is, could this have been prevented? We'll never fully know. But what we do know is that Lori's memory endures through the love of her family and friends, and Mark, he'll have decades behind bars to face the consequences of his actions. In the end, it's a story about the power of truth versus the destructive force of lies. If anything, I hope it encourages us to be vigilant about the people we trust and about the stories we're told. Whether it's from a spouse, a friend, or anyone else, deception can spiral out of control. Let Lori's story stand as a somber warning. Thank you for staying with me through this emotionally charged case. It's not an easy one to discuss, but it's important. These stories remind us how fragile life can be. If you have any thoughts or questions, I'd love to hear them. Did you suspect Mark from the start? Do you think the punishment fits the crime? Let's talk about it in the comments. Also, if you found this video helpful or eye-opening, please share it with your friends. And of course, subscribe for more deep dives into true crime stories. Until next time, take care of yourselves and those you love. And remember, honesty truly can be a matter of life and death.